Good morning, and welcome to the Western Governors Association webinar, COVID-19 Economic Impacts in Mitigation in Rural Communities. I'm Lauren Jeanine. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to WGA's website, westgov.org, after it concludes. Attendees are muted, but we encourage you to use the chat feature to submit questions and comments at any point during the webinar. Questions submitted through the chat will be incorporated into moderated discussion with our speakers. To introduce today's webinar and our first speaker, here is WGA Executive Director Jim Ogsbury.
Thank you, Lauren, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It goes without saying that these are very unusual times, and they are particularly difficult and challenging times for governors who are on the front lines in the battle against COVID-19, taking unprecedented actions to prevent the spread of the virus while at the same time working to keep supply chains open and acquiring medical equipment and supporting healthcare facilities and ensuring food supplies. I think it took this crisis for many people to appreciate the tremendous power of governors and the incredible gravity of their responsibility. Fortunately, governors do not have to face this public health threat alone. They have each other, and they have dedicated partners in the federal family, and we are so appreciative that several top representatives of critical federal agencies are joining us today to discuss COVID-19 economic impacts and mitigation in rural communities. Today's webinar is produced in connection with Reimagining the Rural West, the CHAIRS initiative of WGA Chairman and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. This ambitious effort has been exploring various challenges in rural economic development and infrastructure and quality of life. When we launched this effort last summer, we had not anticipated sessions on the impacts of a global pandemic on rural communities, but here we are. I want to thank our panelists with whom WGA has developed a warm working relationship and partnership. We're looking forward to making further progress on improving the state-federal relationship with these great public servants in the coming months. In the meantime, we're eager to hear their contributions to today's discussion, and I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Bette Brand. And Bette serves as the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. She came to USDA after 35 years with Farm Credit of the Virginias, where she served as Chief Advocate for the agriculture industry and rural businesses, supporting producers at the state and national level and educating policymakers and consumers on agriculture. Since her arrival to USDA in January 2018, Bette has focused on increasing rural America's access to capital, investing in innovative technology, and helping businesses create jobs. Before being appointed Deputy Undersecretary, Bette served as the Rural Business Cooperative Service Administrator, where she supported the RD mission through strong leadership, program stewardship, and also through partnerships with sister agencies like SBA and DOE. She has traveled extensively across the country to better understand the specific needs and priorities of America's diverse rural communities. Bette, thank you for kicking off today's discussion.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jim, for that warm welcome. It is really great to be here with you and with everyone else on the call today, and I'm especially grateful for the opportunity to share the resources and to learn about the needs in the small towns at which all of you serve. So rural development and Western governors have a lot of the audience and constituency overlap. So our time together here and other times has always been highly productive. But before I begin, I also want to thank everyone on the call for what I know that you are doing to support rural communities. Rural Americans are really stepping up to the plate. All of our leaders on this call play a special role because you're at the intersection of so many partnerships that are going to help us through this difficult time. State, local, federal, and private are all partners and are all essential. We are all working together, and it is helping. We're in this together, and we'll get through this together. So for anyone here today who doesn't know about USDA Rural Development's program, I'd like to just give you a big picture of what we do. So our mission is to help improve the economy and the quality of life in rural America through our financial support. We have about 47 programs that provide loans, grants, and loan guarantees to help create jobs and support economic development and essential services such as housing, healthcare, first responder services and equipment, and water and electric communications infrastructure. With these programs, we are able to promote economic development and by supporting loans to businesses through banks, credit unions, and community-managed lending pools. All are our partners in developing our program. They're not only administered through our Washington, D.C. office, but many of our programs are administered through our more than 450 field operations across the country. We also offer technical assistance and information to help businesses, rural producers, and cooperatives get started and improve the effectiveness of their operations. We work closely with community leaders, including the lenders and borrowers who make all of these projects possible. I think we have some of those folks on the call with us today as well. So I have a lot of information I want to share with you, and I look forward to your questions. But first, let me tell you this, that rural development, like so many other service-oriented organizations, is operating 100% remotely under social distancing guidelines. But remote does not mean part-time. It means full-time and full force. We are sending out information, processing requests, and making assistance available in real time. We are at full capacity, so please know that we're here to help you. Also, most of the people who work in rural development either live in or have lived in the areas that we serve. So they are really good at communicating, and strong communications is absolutely key at this time. So I encourage everyone on this call to stay in touch with us through our state directors, our website, and our COVID-19 subscribers list. Our website has all of the information on it. You can just go to rd.usda.gov, and there you'll quickly find your way to our state office's contact information, as well as a link at the top of our homepage is a link to our COVID-19 response page. And if you want to go directly to that response page, you'll see it right at the top of the slide. It's www.rd.usda.gov/coronavirus. Agricultural Secretary Perdue understands that rural development is strategically positioned to be a key solution in solving these challenges. And through his leadership, the Federal Rural Research Guide was created, and it provides information about everything that USDA and our federal families are doing to help rural America through this crisis. So that Federal Rural Research Guide can also be found on our website at www.rd.usda.gov. We've also created a special email mailing list for information about COVID-19 assistance, and you can sign up for it on that same page, the COVID-19 page. And also, if you follow us on Twitter, our handle is at usda.rd. And there you'll also find helpful information as well as some inspiring stories coming from rural communities. So all over the country, the businesses and institutions supported by rural development programs are stepping up and giving back. At Somerset College in Kentucky, they developed a new prototype and are now 3D printing more than 100 face shields per hour. Rural Development has always been proud to support the college's 3D printing curriculum, and it's incredible to see how that valuable equipment is being put to this critically important use right now. Some of my favorite stories come from the small independent business owners that we provided funding to over the years. For example, Connie Baker is an owner of a distillery in Carbondale, Colorado. Connie didn't know at first what she'd do when Governor Polis ordered her customers, the bars and restaurants, to close. However, it didn't take her long to realize that what she could do is help. She started making hand sanitizers instead of spirits and is now providing it to police, fire department, grocery stores, and doctors. So I'm looking forward to taking your questions, but I do want to let you know generally that rural development is offering immediate financial relief in the following areas. So payment deferrals for guaranteed loan programs. For our 4 major loan guarantee programs, the Business and Industry, the Rural Energy for America, or otherwise known as REAP, Community Facilities, and Water and Wastewater Disposal loan guarantee programs, lenders may now offer a 180-day payment deferral to those customers in those programs. Likewise, on the housing assistance for single-family home borrowers, so borrowers with single-family housing direct or guaranteed loans are subject to a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions for 60 days starting on March 19th. Also, payment assistance and payment suspensions available for customers experiencing reduction in income to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know that our rural hospitals and schools are already facing challenges, and we are looking for flexibilities in servicing on our community facilities direct loan program too, and that we will be sending out more information regarding that soon. Finally, the assistance for multifamily tenant vouchers. Customers that have lost their jobs may have an increase in the voucher amount. And also until July 25th, 2020, customers cannot be evicted from their rental home because of failure to pay or be charged fees or penalties. In addition, rural development extended the application window for the following programs so that people will have more time to apply. For the Rural Business Cooperative Service Agency, the Rural Business Development Grant, RBDG, was extended until April 15th. Likewise, the Rural Energy for America grant program was also extended until April 15th. The Rural Utility Service, the Reconnect, extended their application deadline as well till April 15th. So in addition to the extensions on applications, rural development has also allocated allocated additional resources by Congress through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, known as the CURES Act. So the Distance Learning and Telemedicine, DLT, received additional $25 million that is available for grants. That's on top of the $70 million that is already available. And we're open a second window round of application, and that begins tomorrow, April 14th, and closes on July 13th. Likewise, the Reconnect, our broadband high-speed internet program, has $100 million set aside for those that were unsuccessful grant applications from the first Reconnect funding round. And likewise, those applications are due on April 15th. And finally, the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program received an additional $20.5 million, which will support up to $1 billion for new rural business guaranteed loans for working capital. So again, all of these details can be found on our website, www.rd.usda.gov. So I don't know what brings you here today, whether you're here because you have a story like Connie in your own community, or the fabric of your once quiet town has been reshaped by the power of this crisis. But as you move from learning to action, I will simply close with the comment that at USDA, we stand as your partner in building healthy rural communities that will enable rural prosperity now and for generations to come. So I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Betty. This is Lauren Tonino with Western Governors Association again, and we have several questions to follow up with you on, and we thank you so much for taking some time to be with us here today and help answer our questions. So first of all, one question that we had is, what are the longer-term impacts and challenges that you see and that rural development is preparing for rural communities as a result of this crisis, and how will USDA programs address those challenges in the longer term?
Yes, well, thank you for that question. You know, every sector of our rural communities is feeling the impact of COVID-19. I think the biggest challenge will be restarting the rural economy as the nation comes out of their shelter in place and adapting to what this new normal will be. I know that USDA Rural Development is uniquely positioned to provide assistance in all of those sectors, and we're ready to make things happen in our rural communities. With nearly 50 programs targeted to rural communities and a staff positioned in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Western Pacific, we stand ready to assist. So we have funding available right now, and we're actively soliciting applications for projects that impact broadband access, rural healthcare, education, public safety, rural businesses, utility infrastructure, and housing. And like I mentioned before, information on all of our programs and more specifics on our COVID-19 response to date can be on our website at rd.usda.gov/coronavirus. And we're updating that as things change. It's a very dynamic process. And certainly if you sign up to subscribe to our notices, alerts, you'll get the information will be coming anytime a change is made, will come right to your inbox. So that's a good way to stay in contact.
Great, thank you. A lot has also been made, I've seen several articles and things of that nature about the relative impacts of mitigation measures on rural communities as compared to urban communities. People frequently cite the fact that rural school districts may not have the technology or the broadband to be able to conduct online classes and distance learning to the same degree that their urban counterparts can. Are there other infrastructure issues that you think this crisis has brought to light, or has it kind of confirmed what rural development's priorities have always been? Another example that we've heard is with hand washing. Some rural communities don't even have, some rural households don't even have indoor plumbing and running water and all of that. So I guess just your impressions on how this crisis has either confirmed or maybe reoriented USDA's perceptions of what their priorities are for making investments in rural communities to ensure that they have the same quality of life as urban communities.
Thank you. It is so important that our rural communities have the same access to healthcare, to education, to very basic things that now, like water and clean drinking water, and also high-speed internet. You know, high-speed internet is no longer just an amenity; it's a necessity everywhere. And so, this current situation has definitely reinforced the critical nature of our efforts to invest in high-speed internet in our rural communities. So we're doubling down on rural broadband and have just announced over $70 million available for rural communities through our distance learning and telemedicine program. And also there'll be a second round of funding on the Reconnect applications that are due this Wednesday. Likewise, our water and wastewater programs will continue to receive a priority as we realize just how important that is in our rural communities and giving those communities the same chances that our urban communities have.
Great, thank you. I just want to remind all of our attendees that you are welcome to submit questions through the chat, and we'll pass those on. And if there are any questions that we don't get to today, USDA has offered to answer those and follow up later. So please do send any questions that you have, and we'll make sure that we get you an answer. The next one from me is, how is USDA helping rural healthcare providers deal with the outbreak specifically? I understand there's some targeted resources for rural healthcare systems. Could you talk about that?
Yes, we know that the rural health care facilities, especially all across the country in rural communities, is really facing challenges now. Even before this pandemic came about, there are many rural hospitals that were suffering. And so for the near term, we are providing payment flexibilities to our hospitals that are working with our guaranteed programs. They already have some payment flexibilities, and we're looking at more guidance coming out very soon for our those that receive our direct loan programs. And likewise, they've all been given blanket approval to take advantage of the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program without having any unnecessary paperwork or approval from us. And then in the long term, we have $2.8 billion in loan authority that's available for community facility projects. And we've never turned down a hospital project because of lack of funding. So if any of you all state executives know of rural hospital projects that need funding, please contact our state offices and let's get to work trying to see what we can do to help those hospitals.
Great, thank you. A question from a participant. Is USDA's Rural Utility Service taking any steps to assist electric borrowers during the pandemic, or are there any future steps RUS is considering?
Yes. So Rural Utility Service is doing more for working with the electric borrowers. Number one, working with SBA and making sure that inquiring on their behalf for the eligibility for the payroll protection program, and also on a case-by-case basis, they are able to help the electric program borrower gain access to obligated funds more quickly at a current interest rates by considering extensions of loan terms and considering requests to move obligated funds between the electric program's 6 budget purposes, where the new purpose is cleared environmental review. So looking for opportunities to streamline and be more proactive for the our electric borrowers, and likewise are continuing to look for other opportunities and flexibilities and helping those the electric members.
Great. All right. And then I guess the last question I just wanted to ask really fast is, how has your experience been so far collaborating with other federal agencies? I think the resource guide that was published this morning is a great example of this, but it seems like USDA is really focused on participating in the whole of government response to the pandemic.
Yes, that is so important. We realize that without these partnerships, state, federal, working with our federal families to make things easier, clarify for other federal agencies that may not have as much experience in the rural communities, all of those that we, in addition to the resource guide, we think it's so important that we work with our partners in the federal family. So not in addition to the resource guide, there are also, for example, SBA was one of them that we have worked with to try to make sure we connected our rural lenders that we work with quite a bit, make sure they all had connections and were on the radar for SBA to gain access to the portal so that they could offer loans and have that program available to our rural communities, just like it is in the urban communities. And likewise, working with SBA to make sure that agriculture producers and cooperatives are eligible and that they understand, SBA understands the little nuances about those two types of businesses, because we have had such extended experience with them. But in the end, we all know that we have to work together, and it's so important. And we continue to look forward to ways to work together with our other various federal families, whether it be community assistance from FEMA, the EPA, or Department of Justice and FCC, or looking at resources from the Veterans Administration or CDC and Health and Human Services. All of those things are important and are listed in that guide.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you for participating again this morning, Deputy Undersecretary Brand. As I said, we are collecting questions for USDA Rural Development specifically, and we'll make sure that they are passed along to Deputy Undersecretary Brand and her team, and they'll be able to follow up with you. So if there are questions that we haven't gotten to or other ones that come to your mind, please do submit those, and we'll make sure that you get an answer. So thank you again. We really appreciate your time with us this morning, and we really appreciate all the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you.
Great. Well, that was a great question, too, to segue into our next section of the webinar. We have a wonderful group of regional leaders from different federal agencies in Region 8, which is based here in Denver, where WGA is as well. And so we're going to go around and give everyone an opportunity to give a quick overview of what their organizations are doing to address the challenge of coronavirus, and again, submit questions as we go, and we'll get to them one by one. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Susan Beckman, the Regional Director for Region 8 for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Susan, I'm pulling up your PowerPoint slide right now.
Great. Good morning, Lauren. Are we ready?
Good morning. Yes, they're pulled up and ready to go.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate the opportunity to share some resources that Health and Human Services is providing rural healthcare systems during the COVID-19 crisis and in the future with the audience this morning. And we'll just, next slide. The COVID-19 response, Fema, Health and Human Services, and our federal partners are actively working with the state, local, tribal, and territorial governments to execute a whole of America response to COVID-19 pandemic and to protect the health and safety of the American people. Underneath the umbrella of Health and Human Services, agencies that are very involved with this response are the Centers for Disease Control, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, Food and Drug Administration, the Assistant to the Secretary, Preparedness and Response, Long-Term Living, Children and Families. All of our agencies are very involved. 1 in 5 Americans are living in rural areas, and the hospitals and providers that serve them are the backbone of the nation's healthcare system. So I'd like to share a little bit about what we're doing specifically in Region 8, because so much of our area is rural. In fact, it's frontier, and it's a little bit different than the rest of the nation. We're not Delaware, where rural areas are very close together and heavily populated areas close to heavily populated areas. Sometimes in our region, we have citizens driving 5 hours to see a doctor. It's very different. So Region 8 is made up of Utah, Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. The current situation of COVID-19 in this region, we're pretty fortunate. We have 10,882 cases. We've had 312 deaths and 1,741 hospitalized. Those numbers are big for our area, but not near what some of the coastal states are seeing in this crisis. Major priority for Region 8 include medical surge capabilities, alternative care facilities, distribution of PPE, ventilators, and testing supplies. All Region 8 states have received major disaster declarations, and what that means is that they are eligible for the 75-25 cost share split, costs they incur with the COVID-19 crisis through the Fema formula. Next slide. Many healthcare facilities are making massive financial sacrifices, and rural healthcare communities are complying with federal recommendations to delay non-essential treatment and surgeries. And this is a very significant impact on their cash flow. So the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare have advanced and accelerated payments, and they have also provided some waiver relief, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. The advanced medical payments are loans that help them with their cash flow issues and allow them to keep their doors open. The payments will go to hospitals, suppliers, doctors, non-physician practitioners, and medical equipment suppliers. While most of these providers and suppliers can receive 3 months of Medicare reimbursement, certain providers in rural areas can receive up to 6 months of reimbursements. The recently voted on stimulus CARES Act funding included $100 billion in relief funds to hospitals and healthcare providers that receive Medicare fees for service reimbursement. These are payments, they are not loans, and they're vitally important to our rural healthcare providers and crisis access hospitals. So on this slide, there are links in blue. If people want to go to the actual CMS site, they can read more about these funding opportunities. Next slide. It's important to know who's getting the HHS COVID grants. HHS has developed a feature that allows public viewing of the COVID-19 grants and cooperative agreement awards. Just last week, the Department of Health and Human Services announced an upcoming action by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to provide $186 million in funding for additional resources to state and local jurisdictions in support of the nation's response of the COVID-19. A lot of times these are non-competitive and rolling grants, and they have a short turnaround. So I would recommend that everybody really watch on this website when these grants come up because the turnaround is pretty quick. A lot of the states have submitted 1135 waivers, and next slide, I'm sorry, Lauren. A lot of states have submitted the 1135 waivers, and that has given great flexibility in regulations and also in reducing the regulations for healthcare providers. There were emergency declarations and emergency rulemaking that allowed these changes to apply immediately. On regulatory relief, CMS issued unprecedented array of waivers to help the healthcare system add capacity and flexibility during the COVID crisis. It allows hospitals and healthcare systems to expand capacity by sending patients to a variety of community-based localities. Maximizing healthcare workforce. These changes apply to doctors, nurses, and other clinicians and focus on reducing supervision, certification, and licensure requirements. For instance, doctors can now care for patients at rural hospitals across state lines via telephone, radio, or online communications. A nurse practitioner may perform some medical exams at Medicare facilities. Occupational therapies can perform initial assessments on homebound patients in their home, and they've waived a lot of paperwork so that doctors and practitioners can use more verbal rather than written medical orders. These changes have dramatically lessened the administrative burdens for the frontline providers. Next slide. And I have just added this last sheet because it's a good check of all the waivers that CMS has approved in telehealth, care by phone, expanding the healthcare workforce, patients over paperwork. It's just a great document to have. So I wanted to leave the audience with that. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you to the audience for taking the time today to hear from Health and Human Services in Region 8.
Thank you so much. And we did get a question from someone about whether these slides will be available afterward. And with your permission, we would like to post those on WGA's website so that folks can come back to this and learn more.
Yes, I embedded the links so that people can really get a little bit more in depth. These are great links to follow to the initial or the websites. It'll help out a lot.
Great. And I just wanted to acknowledge that WGA is planning to do another webinar that will focus specifically on how rural communities are responding to the health aspects of this crisis. Today, we started with the initial focus of economic impacts and mitigation, but obviously, as rural health providers respond to this, there's a lot of information to be shared and strategies to share on that as well. And Susan, we talked about some of those things. For example, in the long term, how to ensure that rural health care providers are able to continue providing the same level of care as they did before this crisis. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on that topic today?
No, I just think that when we're done with the crisis and we move into recovery, it's very important that the systems that we had in place and the care that we had isn't lessened in our rural health care areas because it was somewhat volatile anyway. so that we have to build on, the good healthcare that we had in communities, and to make sure that we have that. It's so key to the economic health of rural America to have good healthcare provided in those areas.
And I think you did touch on this in your presentation, but just to reiterate, obviously we've heard a lot about rural healthcare systems that are having financial issues because of the lack of patients and regularly scheduled operations and things like that. If a rural health provider is experiencing financial issues, what are there resources available through HHS, and how can they go about getting those?
Thank you, Lauren. Through the Centers of CMS, there are the advanced medical payments that are loans. They do this with other natural disasters, and these are loans to rural hospitals that they can receive up to 6 months for Medicare reimbursements. And then with the CARES Act, there's $100 billion in relief funds to hospitals and healthcare providers, and that's vitally important to our rural healthcare providers and crisis access hospitals.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we will move now to Evelyn Lim, who is the Regional Administrator for Region 8 for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and who has been assisting back in D.C. with HUD's response to coronavirus. Evelyn, would you like to share a little bit about what HUD is doing?
Great. Thank you, Lauren. First, I wanted to just thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon, and thank Jim and the whole WGA team for the invite. I apologize in advance. I'm going to have to jump off a little bit early due to a conflict, but I'm happy to respond to any questions that you may want to send me after the webinar. And of course, I wanted to thank everyone on the line for all you're doing to help people to provide leadership and work together to overcome the many challenges being presented by coronavirus. As Lauren mentioned, I'm the Regional Administrator for Region 8. We cover the same 6 states as Regional Director Beckman at HHS. But at HUD, I like to say in Region 8, we put the rural in housing and urban development because most of our states are rural in nature. So today I just wanted to spend a few minutes outlining the efforts being undertaken by HUD alongside many of our state, local, and tribal leaders as partners to provide immediate relief to homeowners, renters, and those experiencing homelessness. Our first concern, as is everyone's, is to help keep people safe and healthy and to ensure the most vulnerable populations we all serve are getting what they need. We want to keep people in their homes, prevent any further dislocation, and ensure those at greatest risk of the virus, particularly those that are currently homeless, are taken care of. Because of the particular vulnerability of the homeless, who are at higher risk and more likely to have compromised health, COVID-19 is an extremely urgent concern. Secretary Carson, as many of you know, as both HUD Secretary and world-renowned physician, is heavily involved as a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, led by Vice President Pence. The CARES Act included an additional $12.4 billion to HUD to help communities with services, especially for senior citizens, the homeless, and public health services. Broadly, that includes $9 billion for community planning and development, $1 billion for housing, and $3.24 billion for public and Indian housing. Less than a week after the President signed the Act, HUD announced over $3 billion to go to state and local grantees in the form of CDBG, ESG, and HOPWA funding. $75 million of that went to Region 8. Further, $200 million in grants to support tribal communities. $28 million went to Region 8 tribes. We are helping communities respond quickly and providing maximum flexibility in utilizing their CDBG funds. Even before the CARES Act was signed, HUD provided what we call a mega waiver to allow flexibility in utilizing funds that grantees already have. Additional flexibilities were provided in the Act, and we'll be giving guidance very soon on how to apply those. Very early on, HUD worked with our partners at HHS, in particular the CDC, HRSA, and SAMHSA, to develop tools and guidance for our continuum of care homelessness service providers. This includes specific guidance for preparedness in shelters and encampment settings. HUD does weekly office hour calls with hundreds of homeless service providers, answering their questions and providing the latest guidance on best practices. HUD is strongly encouraging homeless assistance providers, especially shelter providers, to take measures to prevent and manage the spread of the virus, including the coordination of medical care for residents who are ill. This includes plugging in with their state or local public health authorities to ensure their efforts are coordinated at the state and local level. Very generally, for the safety of HUD-related multifamily residents, those in FHA-insured healthcare facilities, and the homeless, we are advising everyone serving these populations to follow the CDC coronavirus guidelines and to follow the direction and work in concert with their local health officials. For both Section 8 multifamily contract holders and public housing, HUD is ensuring that all housing assistance payments, operating funds, and other funding streams continue to be obligated throughout this period. All 2020 multifamily project-based rental assistance contracts, Section 202 contracts for the elderly, and Section 811 contracts for low-income people with disabilities were fully funded before the outbreak. Through the CARES Act, we received supplemental funding for all three accounts. An additional $1 billion for owners and sponsors of properties receiving project-based assistance for reduced tenant payments as a result of coronavirus, an additional $50 million to support our Section 202 program for housing for low and very low income elderly, which includes up to $10 million for service coordinators, an additional $15 million for our Section 811 program, which supports rental housing for low-income persons with disabilities. The CARES Act established a 120-day moratorium on evictions for the public housing and housing choice voucher programs. A public housing authority cannot issue a notice to vacate or file a legal action to evict with the court for non-payment of rent or other fees or charges, or charge fees, penalties, or other charges related to the non-payment of rent. After the 120-day period expires, all notices to vacate must provide the tenant with a 30-day notice. The CARES Act provided HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing with $3.24 billion in supplemental funding, which includes $1.25 billion for tenant-based rental assistance for individuals who lose their jobs as a result of the coronavirus, $850 million for administrative expenses, $400 million in housing assistance payments, $685 million for the Housing Operating Fund, and $300 million for Native American programs, $200 of which goes to our Formula Native American Housing Block Grants, and $100 million for Indian Community Development Block Grants. The bill established a moratorium on foreclosures and foreclosure-related eviction under HUD's Office of American Native Programs, ONAP, Section 184 and Section 184A loan guarantee programs. It provides ONAP program borrowers experiencing a financial hardship caused by the coronavirus the right to request and receive forbearance relief. The CARES Act extends to the eviction moratorium to our CPD HOPWA and home grant programs as well. In summary, the CARES Act provides additional funding and broad waiver authority and flexibilities to allow HUD and our partners to continue the mission of providing decent, safe, and affordable housing. We are streamlining, expediting, and in some cases, waiving red tape to get funds working in the community for the people we serve right away. Currently, HUD is hard at work evaluating the requirements of the CARES Act for the remaining $9 billion appropriated to HUD, which includes new formulas to take into account coronavirus impacts as well as insular areas. Meanwhile, while on maximum telework posture, HUD remains fully functional. HUD's multifamily office will continue to accept new deals and close the ones we have, employing e-closings and other process changes to ensure that lenders and others who are involved in these transactions can continue to work on deals, but safely and from remote locations when necessary. We want to keep the provision of multifamily housing moving in anticipation of the other side of this crisis. There is now and will continue to be a great need for affordable rental housing. We'll issue additional guidance shortly. Likewise, for single-family buyers under the FHA, we want to keep transactions moving. Similar to our multifamily program, we've put in place a variety of solutions for lenders, appraisers, and other stakeholders to continue to work on new originations, but have minimized the majority of the on-site or in-person work usually required. For anyone with an FHA loan experiencing a hardship, HUD took immediate action. On March 18th, we declared a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions of borrowers with FHA-insured single-family mortgages for 60 days. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have done the same. FHA issued a mortgagee letter with loss mitigation options for single-family borrowers affected by COVID-19. These loss mitigation home retention options are available to single-family borrowers, and they also extend deadlines for home equity conversion mortgage borrowers. To be clear, servicers must offer borrowers a forbearance if the borrower is experiencing a financial hardship as a result of COVID-19 for up to 6 months. That allowance may include one or more periods of reduced or suspended payments without specific terms of repayment. And if the borrower requests it, servicers must extend the forbearance for an additional 6 months. As long as the borrower is on a forbearance plan, the lender servicer must waive all late fees, charges, and penalties. We've also prioritized the use of so-called standalone partial claims for FHA-insured loans, which was used extensively following the 2017 hurricanes. These partial claims are designed to be used once a borrower's COVID-19 forbearance period ends. Together, these options allow borrowers facing financial hardship due to COVID-19 to stay in their homes now and to hopefully bring their mortgages current in the future. For borrowers who do not qualify for the standalone partial claim at the end of their forbearance period, lenders are required to evaluate them for other loss mitigation options. FHFA recently directed the GSEs to temporarily expand the use of appraisal alternatives and to provide flexibility around employment verification. We provided a similar policy, and the FHA has already issued temporary waivers related to the in-person contact that is part of early default intervention. Very soon, we'll be making similar announcements regarding to our multifamily FHA borrowers. In addition, we're keeping an eye on liquidity in mortgage markets. In fact, last Friday, Ginnie Mae announced relief through the PTAP Advance program. The application of PTAP to COVID-19 allows servicers to apply for assistance to make their principal and interest payments to investors holding mortgage-backed securities. This is a last resort option. However, this liquidity backstop is intended to minimize disruptions in the mortgage servicing and MBS capital markets as borrower forbearance and loss mitigation programs are implemented nationwide to provide relief to homeowners. At HUD, we're looking at all options and available authorities to provide relief and to keep families in their homes and allowing the flexibility to get through this crisis. The CARES Act were designed to help contain the spread of coronavirus among homeless individuals and also provide state, local, and tribal governments with homeless prevention funding for individuals and families who would otherwise become homeless due to coronavirus. As Secretary Carson and the President have made clear, no one should lose their home because of this virus. So in conclusion, I just wanted to thank you all for your leadership and attention, for all that you're doing on the front lines to assist our most vulnerable populations throughout the country. As we work to mitigate the effects of this invisible killer, know that you have a partner in HUD, and please reach out should you have any questions. Again, I apologize for having to jump off early, but I'm happy to answer any questions. In addition, our HUD.gov website contains all the information I just mentioned, and for the latest information, you may visit HUD.gov/coronavirus. Thank you, and over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Do you have time for just one or two questions?
Sure.
Okay, a quick one first from an audience member is, how are shelter workers and tenants dealing with social distancing? I think you touched on that, but maybe you could just reiterate what steps folks are taking.
Sure. So it's one of the issues that I think we've had to look at differently in response to, normally in a typical disaster, when we look at homeless populations, we're usually finding them a home. But based on CDC guidance, we've people who can normally convalesce at home, if they're homeless, don't have a home to convalesce at. So the guidance includes safe measures and safe distances for how they should be treating their population. One of the interesting things we found in this disaster is that homeless service providers are really on the front lines. And so a lot of them need the PPE and other kind of equipment to help care for their populations. And so we've been plugging them in with their state and local health officials to ensure that they're in line with whatever the governor is requesting for those types of materials.
Thank you. And then you mentioned the mega waiver for flexibility for CDBG funds. What kind of flexibility does that offer? Is it in the way that the money can be used, or in reporting requirements?
The answer is both. So the mega waiver applies to FY19 and FY20 funds. There is a whole different set of waivers that will apply to what we're calling the CDBG CV funds, which are in the CARES Act. And so we're still going through that. That will be a Federal Register notice. But the mega waiver is on our website now, and it applies to how to amend your plans and what you can utilize the dollars for, et cetera.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. If anyone has other questions for HUD, please do send them to WGA, and we'll pass them along and make sure that you get an answer. We really appreciate your time and for sharing so much valuable information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Our next speaker is Dan Nordberg, the Regional Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration for Region 8. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we look forward to learning more.
Yeah, good morning, Lauren. Can you hear me okay just before I start?
Yep, you're perfect.
Great. Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, WGA, and the team there. Again, just echoing Evelyn's comments, we certainly appreciate the partnership with your organization as well as your membership. And we're going to need that partnership moving forward because we do have a task at hand, but I'm very optimistic, and I know that we can get through this together. To really kind of dive into what SBA has been working on March 27th, Congress passed the CARES Act, and the principal provision of that was the Paycheck Protection Program. Within 7 days, SBA had implemented the Paycheck Protection Program, which established a $349 billion loan system for employers to be able to retain their employees during this difficult time. I'm continuing to get a number of inquiries as to what are the eligibility as well as the parameters of that program. So I thought I'd give just a deep dive going through that once more, so everybody on the line had a clear understanding as to what the program prescribes. This program is for any small business with less than 500 employees, including sole proprietors, independent contractors, as well as other self-employed individuals. So certainly the gig economy was taken into account for the definitions of this program. Private 501c3 nonprofit organizations, including places of worship, as well as religious nonprofits, are also eligible, as well as 501c19 veterans organizations and tribal business concerns. Businesses in certain industries, it's important to note, may have more than 500 employees if they meet the SBA size standards for those industries. So one example of this would be businesses perhaps in the manufacturing industry, where you could have an employee count of up to 1,500 employees and still be eligible. So if you know of constituents in one of those business categories or where they might fall into an industry code that's established as part of the SBA's size standard, it's certainly worth double checking and making sure they know what the employee count is for their eligibility. Another exception to the 500 employee cap in place is for businesses in the hospitality and food industry with more than one location, as long as they don't have more than 500 employees per physical location. So for example, you could have a restaurant owner with 4 restaurants and 200 employees at each of those locations, and that would be acceptable. So that's certainly worth noting, especially since our friends in the hospitality and food service industry are being especially impacted during this difficult time. In terms of maximum loan amount, it's determined based on a formula of your average monthly payroll from the year prior multiplied by 2.5 or $10 million, whatever is the lesser amount. In many instances, it is the lesser amount, but it can go up to $10 million. Since this is an employee retention measure, the loan has some very prescriptive uses as to what you can use it for, including payroll support, employee salaries, paid sick or medical leave, insurance premiums, mortgage, rent, and utility payments. These are not direct loans from the SBA, and that's important to emphasize. The interface and the point of entry for this program is with your lender. So any insured bank, credit union, and farm credit institution are eligible to do these loans. And SBA has provided delegated authority for those lenders to make determinations on borrower eligibility as well as creditworthiness without having to go through all of SBA's usual channels and processes. Instead of, for eligibility purpose, instead of requiring lenders to determine repayment ability, which is really not possible during this crisis, we are asking that they have the borrower certify the following: whether a business was operational on February 15th, 2020, and had employees for whom it paid salaries and payroll taxes, as well as a statement saying that the current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. There are no borrower or lender fees for participation in the Paycheck Protection Program. There's no credit elsewhere standard. There's no collateral or personal guarantee requirements under the program, and borrowers will also not be charged for any prepayment penalties. The maturity of the loan is 2 years. The interest rate is 1%, and these loans are 100% guaranteed by the federal government. It's also worth noting on that SBA is allowing deferment of payments on these loans for at least 6 months. So that does afford a greater amount of flexibility for the small businesses who will be participating. Now, the primary feature of the program is loan forgiveness, and the statute establishes that the borrower shall be eligible for loan forgiveness equal to the amount spent by the borrower during the 8-week period after the origination of the loan for payroll costs incurred as compared to the year prior. So there will be a year-to-year comparison of your average FTE and payroll, and your loan forgiveness will be proportionate to maintaining employees and wages. The amount forgiven will be reduced proportionally by any reduction in employees retained compared to the prior year, and reduced by the reduction in pay of any employee beyond 25% of their prior year compensation. Last but not least, 75% of the loan must be used on payroll in order to receive the full loan forgiveness. So that leaves the remaining 25%, which can be used for mortgage, rent, and utility payments. Now, as I mentioned on the front end, and I can't emphasize enough, this program was set up within 7 days. This is a $349 billion program. As such, the definitions for eligibility, as well as processes for our lenders who are partners in this process, are coming out daily. It is more or less a rolling regulatory environment. So there will probably more than likely than not be questions today that I cannot answer. However, there's hopefully a number that I can answer. But I just ask for your continued patience, because this is a huge program. It's a huge undertaking to deal with an unprecedented situation. And as such, the regulatory process is one that is very fluid. So I will just close my comments with that, and certainly Lauren would welcome any questions at this time.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple questions coming in. So first, what should businesses do if they bank at large banks that are not accepting PPP applications or are saying that they are backed up or have used all of their funds?
Yeah, great question. I think we've all seen in the media some of the prevalence of maybe some larger banks, and the certainly the Wells Fargo situation, I think, comes to people's mind. I can tell you, whether it's a large bank or a community bank or credit union or farm credit institution, all those eligible entities are working very, very hard to try and get their clients on, as well as new customers, so that they can get the capital out to small business owners that they desperately need right now. I will say, though, for some business owners, even if they have an existing relationship with a lender, that's not a guarantee that that lender will be doing the PPP loans, or that in fact that they may not have to go and talk to other lenders that are participating in this program. However, I think it's worth noting that everyone I've talked to in the lending industry, not to say it's a challenge, because keep in mind, they're getting a massive influx of volume to process these loans. Some are taking periodic breaks so that they can catch up before accepting new applications. Others have a continuous stream and process to be able to adapt to that. So it really just depends on the area you're at, as well as the area you're at, as well as what you need and how fast you need it. But I do recommend, and we have been recommending to small businesses, that if at first you don't try, keep trying. Usually that second, third attempt, you'll be able to find something. SBA hopes to be able to make resources in the near future on our website that lists out the lenders who are participating in a state-by-state basis. I do not have that information at this time, but we know that would be a valuable resource, and hopefully can provide that in the near future.
Great. Another question about who is eligible. So currently, electric cooperatives are not eligible for PPP. Is the SBA looking at any flexibilities in being able to allow co-ops to apply?
Yeah, great question. Traditionally, there's been a backdoor prohibition on quasi-governmental industries receiving SBA support and financing. That's one of those areas that I think we are going to need to wait for the final definitions to promulgate before we can fully give a definitive answer on that front. Certainly it might depend on the setup and how that cooperative is organized. However, traditionally, and again, based on precedent, those are generally quasi-governmental and those would be prohibited. However, it's important to note as we try and interpret the legislative intent as put forth by Congress, as put in the CARES Act, those are ongoing conversations. And that doesn't just extend to like utility cooperatives, that extends to definitions of agricultural related industries, rural hospitals, and the inclusions of some of those other very important industries to our rural communities. So I think further definitions are coming. The rule that is set forth on SBA's website right now is just an interim rule. That will be continuing to be updated on a week-to-week basis, and I hope to be able to provide an update on a subsequent session in the near future.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Another question from the audience. Are foreign-owned or headquartered companies with employees in the U.S. eligible, assuming they meet all of the other requirements?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is one that has popped up a few times that we are awaiting greater definition on as it pertains to the CARES Act. For traditional SBA financing, there are some exceptions and allowances. However, as it pertains to implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program, we are awaiting greater definition on that. So I apologize, I don't have an answer today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dan. I think we'll pause with you for right there and move on to Jeanine Petterson, who is Jeanine is the Mitigation Division Director for Region 8 for Fema. So Jeanine, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Lauren. And I too appreciate the opportunity to speak today about FEMA COVID-19 response and recovery programs. So a number of the agency programs that have been presented before me are really specifically targeted for rural communities. I'll just give a very broad overview of the response costs that we're paying for under the Disaster Relief Fund that we hope will help rural economies be in kind of a much better position to rebound from. And then looking ahead, I'll speak about some efforts to initiate interagency recovery coordination. So as we begin to navigate the significant supplemental appropriations provided by Congress and explore kind of what recovery from this pandemic looks like. So as Susan mentioned, as of Saturday, every U.S. state and most territories have been issued major federal disaster declarations for the first time in U.S. history. So this is certainly a different response for FEMA, a different kind of disaster, a much different scale, and in some instances, a very different way of using our traditional disaster relief programs. So during this unprecedented time for our agency, FEMA really has been committed throughout the response to simplifying and accelerating the disbursement of funding assistance to our local, state, territorial, and tribal partners. So under the nationwide and state major disaster declarations, in coordination with HHS, FEMA is reimbursing health and safety actions being taken by our partners at all levels in response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So many of these reimbursements come through FEMA's Public Assistance Disaster Relief Program, and they include such measures as emergency medical care, medical sheltering, purchase and distribution of food, water, ice, medicine, and other consumable supplies, and reimbursement for state, tribe, territory, and or local government overtime costs. So given the unique circumstances we're in, we've really worked hard to simplify the public assistance application and funding process so that local officials can really receive funding more quickly. So applicants can complete an online form with cost estimates, and the supporting documentation that's needed is very limited. So if an applicant has an immediate need, FEMA has been turning around expedited funding based on estimated cost in as little as 48 hours. We've also made some other program adjustments that I'll quickly mention. We understand how important food security is in rural areas, and the agency just recently issued a new pandemic-specific guidance that allows FEMA to reimburse states when they purchase food for distribution through food banks and food pantry networks to kind of address the COVID-19 related shortfalls. It also came up the issue about homeless shelters, and FEMA regional administrators have also been delegated the authority to approve state requests for sheltering specifically impacted populations, including the homeless, to ensure that these very vulnerable populations are able to shelter in facilities that allow for social distancing. We're also able to fund certain nonprofits that are providing emergency care services, such as shelter and food distribution. And we've been providing funding to other federal agencies, of course, to support our partners with response resources. So a couple of quick examples. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is designing and building alternate care facilities across the West, as well as in Hawaii and the American Flag Pacific Islands. And we're also reimbursing the cost for National Guard personnel that are providing COVID-19 support. So that's a quick overview of the disaster relief fund assistance thus far that's been helping to defray COVID-19 response costs for communities. And again, we hope this assistance will help rural economies be in a better position to rebound from this crisis. But turning from response, I wanted to share a little bit about FEMA shifting focus to economic recovery. As you all are aware, to help address the COVID-19 crisis, the U.S. Congress has passed 3 funding bills, including the CARES Act, which is the largest economic funding bill in the country's history. So some of these are new authorities and others beef up the coffers of existing programs. But as Evelyn mentioned, for HUD, each department and agency has internal teams that are working quickly to formulate how the programs will be implemented so that they can expedite funding to all of our partners. But taken as a whole, the supplementals are a lot coming at everyone, to our states, to our territories, to our tribes, to our local communities. They need to know where the dollars are and kind of what flexibilities they can leverage. And in our experience with FEMA and various disaster experiences, we've kind of consistently seen where increased coordination efforts for recovery are really central to efficient, effective, timely recovery. And we believe the same will apply to economic recovery. So to that end, FEMA is convening the national level interagency recovery coordinators. These are federal agencies that work together as a standing group under the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And during COVID-19 recovery, the National Recovery Leadership Group wants to align programs and reduce confusion related to duplication, streamline and simplify application and delivery processes, and ensure clear communication and comprehensive, accessible information about available assistance. So similarly, at the FEMA regional level, we're beginning to explore the establishment of a regional interagency coordination team. The primary role of these teams will be to provide outreach to our state and all of our partners and identify and kind of pass issues back up to the National Recovery Leadership Group. In Region 8, which is headquartered in Denver, where I'm based, and where much of the regional area we serve is rural, we have a call later this afternoon with our regional federal partners to discuss establishing our own recovery coordination. And some of the benefits we see would be to provide decision makers at all levels with situational awareness, to coordinate agency program processes and ensure effective communication, to support resource requirements of stakeholders through program referral, and then really a two-way communication to both communicate national policies and programs directly to stakeholders, and then to communicate stakeholder concerns to that national level recovery resource group. So through interagency coordination, we hope to be responsive to the needs of rural communities and lend technical assistance and disaster coordination. In the case of COVID-19 economic recovery, these efforts can be accelerated, streamlined, applied nationwide so that all communities, regardless of where you're located, can recover as efficiently as possible. So we do understand the urgency, and we're trying to work hard to identify those things that will be most urgent, and hope that this interagency coordination team can get those flagged and up and on the national radar. So we're looking forward to the possibility of establishing an interagency recovery coordination team. Again, this will help all of us coordinate across our agencies, communicate more effectively, and elevate the concerns of rural communities. Recovery to FEMA really has been more than simply repairing damaged structures. We view it as it does include the restoration and strengthening of systems and assets that are critical to economic stability and vitality and long-term sustainability. So we want you to know that during COVID-19, FEMA stands ready to help address the challenges and leverage opportunities to support rural economic development and enhance vibrant rural communities in the West. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of FEMA's efforts. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lauren.
Great. Thank you very, very much. That was extremely helpful. I do have a question for you. Given that FEMA is now coordinating the whole of government response, is it important for folks to be contacting FEMA first with their assistance requests? Should they be coordinating through FEMA or with other agencies directly?
Oh, no, with other agencies directly. This really is, I mean, this doesn't supplant any authorities of other agencies or their activities. It's just really a coordination mechanism. So definitely our partners should apply directly to those agencies. And again, this is kind of a coordination across our lines of effort.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. I don't see any other questions from the audience. So if folks have any that come to mind, feel free to shoot those over. And in the meantime, we'll move on to Greg Sopkin, who is the Regional Administrator for Region 8 of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Greg, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Lauren and Jim, for inviting me to this important call regarding EPA's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We remain committed to protecting human health and the environment, maintaining the health and safety of our workforce while fulfilling our mission responsibilities is our top priority. We are mainly teleworking like everyone else, but our offices are open, and we are here to fulfill our mission critical functions. So, one thing I've done by way of helping out with states and the rural communities is I've tasked Patrick Davis of our office with reaching out to cities, counties, chambers of commerce, and state and county health and environmental departments, indicating what we're doing, that we're still open, and asking how we may be of assistance. And so, with regard to that, EPA is responsible for approving disinfectants that may be used to kill the COVID-19 virus, including wipes and spray cleaners, and we have expedited approval of over 350 disinfectants that are safe and effective for use against COVID-19. We're also providing important information as it relates to drinking water and wastewater. First off, I'd just like to assure you that the virus has not been detected in drinking water and wastewater. In drinking water, and Americans can continue to use and drink water from their tap as usual. What we've done is we have posted information about our resources that water stakeholders, that includes states, municipalities, utilities, and their workforce, can use to support operations during the pandemic. So, for example, we have resources that can support utilities, such as water utilities, by helping maintain adequate staffing and lab capacity. So if you have any local water co-ops, utilities, and they are having difficulties due to workforce limitations, lab limitations, please reach out to us for help with that. With regard to what we're doing with Superfund activities, we continue to provide essential services such as treating water related to Superfund sites. And as far as other work, we're treating that on a case-by-case basis, consistent with protection of the workforce and the local community needs. So a big part of our mission also includes community redevelopment, and that includes brownfield grants, smart growth grants, environmental assessment and technical assistance, and land revitalization tools for communities. So what we want to do is be a resource for you in the coming months as you prepare to reopen your community and economy. And I certainly can answer more questions about what sort of assistance is available for that. So with that, we recognize that there are severe difficulties communities are facing now and in the future associated with this pandemic. So, please let us know how we may be of assistance. I'll give you Patrick Davis's phone number. It's 303-312-6855 if you want to reach out for help. And I am available to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much. One question I think that may be on people's minds, it's been in the news that there has been some relaxation of regulatory requirements and for environmental issues. So just to get your take on that, it's obviously EPA enforcement is still in place, and businesses are still expected to act responsibly. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so there has been a fair amount of, I would say, misreporting in the press as to what this is. What this is there was a memo issued on March 26th by the head of EPA's Enforcement Division, that's Susan Bodine. And basically what it says is there may be some enforcement discretion, it's a case-by-case basis, concerning routine compliance monitoring and reporting by regulated entities. And what this guidance provides is that if you're a regulated entity, you need to act responsibly to minimize the effects and duration of any noncompliance caused by COVID-19. And if you have any such noncompliance, you need to document it. You need to document the specific nature and dates of noncompliance, how COVID-19 was the cause of the noncompliance, and how you're going to return to compliance as soon as possible. It is not, as misreported in the press, a license to pollute in any way. We expect all regulated entities to continue to manage and operate their facilities in a manner that is safe and protects the public and the environment. Nothing in the policy relieves any entity from the responsibility to prevent, respond to, or report accidental releases of oil, hazardous substances, hazardous chemicals, hazardous waste, and other pollutants as required by federal law. It is simply an acknowledgement that that pretty much every business, every entity, every regulated entity is having difficulties, just like the rest of us, in terms of being able to have available workforce to attend to every routine need. And so when it comes to things like routine compliance monitoring and reporting, there may be enforcement discretion to the extent that was caused by COVID-19. It's an after-the-fact, case-by-case determination by EPA. We expect entities to do the right thing and behave responsibly during this crisis. So I could certainly answer any more detailed questions about that as well. We do have a Q&A on our website about this as well.
Great, thank you. That makes sense. I just wanted to ask again, you mentioned community redevelopment funds. Will there be new programs developed in response to coronavirus, or were you just referring to the programs that currently exist and continuing to support rural communities through those programs?
Yeah, it's a program that, as it currently exists. Essentially, the CARES Act provided an additional $7.23 million to the EPA, but that's to support research, expand pesticide registrations, disinfect the EPA's facilities, and maintain continuity of operations. There hasn't been anything additional to date earmarked for these types of community revitalization funds. The reason I mentioned it just becomes all the more important as we are looking at perhaps a sustained recession, even when people are allowed to go back to work.
Absolutely. Got it. Thank you. Okay. Well, I'd like to take an opportunity to encourage everyone, attendees, to have one last go at submitting questions. I also wanted to just thank again all of our speakers. We're so grateful that they were able to take some time out of their schedules to share this information with WGA and our partners and participants. WGA is going to be planning a couple more webinars related to the response to COVID-19. I mentioned earlier we're developing one that will look specifically at the rural health response. We're hoping to get that on the schedule for sometime next week. We also, building on this conversation, are planning to do a webinar with state and local leaders to talk about exactly what steps they're taking to support rural economies and help individuals, households, businesses navigate the economic impacts of this crisis. So please stay tuned for more information on those. But this week we also have two additional webinars, one on Wednesday, which is Community Anchor Institution Connectivity. This is also part of the Reimagining the Rural West initiative, and we'll be looking at community anchor institutions and broadband. And then on Thursday, we have a webinar called Reimagining Disability Employment Policy in the Rural West. So this is marking the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act and looking at policies that are inclusive of folks with disabilities in rural communities. So we hope that you'll consider registering for both of those, and stay tuned for more information on WGA's upcoming webinars. So again, our participants today were all extremely gracious in donating their time and expertise, and have all said that they're happy to answer questions if you think of some later and want to send them to WGA. We'll make sure that you get an answer. But with that, seeing no additional questions at the moment, I'd just like to say thank you again to everybody for participating, and we will be posting this recording on our website later today, so you can check back and see pieces of it that you may have missed or wanted to hear again. We'll also put the PowerPoint presentations from our speakers up on our website, and we encourage you guys to take a look and share it with other folks who may be interested. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.